All right, so a little bit of international economics, chapter 21. So, international economics. All right, so when we get into some international economics, the idea here is that should we trade with other countries? Well, only if it costs less. And the idea is if you're trading, you're going to trade equal goods for equal goods. You don't, unless the other country is somehow not competent enough to know the value of things, which they do. When you trade things, you are going to trade equal for equal. So no one's going to, quote unquote, get more out of a trade. The idea, though, is that if we don't trade, what happens to us? If we only consume the goods that we ourselves produce, what do? We're going to limit ourselves, right? The way I like to do is to do a quick review of chapter 2. What did we do in chapter 2? The PPC. What does the PPC stand for again? Production Possibilities Curve. Lovely. If we limit ourselves, right, so remember that this is like consumer goods and capital goods. If we don't trade, we are limited to the amount of consumption we can do by this line, by this curve, right? And that's assuming that everybody has a job and all of our resources are being used, right? I mean, this is the maximum that we can get to. Normally, when I ask you, can we get out to this point where we have this many capital goods and this many consumer goods, can we get there? No, we can't. That's if we don't trade, right? So the main reason why we trade we can get outside of our production possibilities curve. We can exceed it, all right? So we can actually consume and produce more than we could normally, right? And the idea here is that we will focus on producing goods that other countries want, right? So if they can't produce good corn in Africa or wherever, the idea is that we will produce more corn in our country even though we don't need it, right? We as a country can produce more corn than our country will consume. So what will we do with the excess? We ship it out to somewhere else, all right? So normally when you don't trade, you would tell your farmers at some stage, once you've produced enough corn so that everybody in this country is going to buy what you produce, right, cut off, right? And then what do we do with all of our farmland? It sits and rots, or we sell it off to the highest bidder and it gets turned into housing and apartments and whatnot, right? Because we have to utilize our resources in some fashion. But if we can trade, since we are very good in this portion of the country at growing corn, that's what we should do. Because it's easier for us to grow corn than it is for the people in the Sahara Desert to grow corn. Go figure, right? But the idea then is that those people in the Sahara Desert, they could potentially do something that we can't do.
Make lots of glass.
Well, one, they could produce glass, but the other thing that they can do is they can mine for gold, platinum, uranium, silver, gems, and jewels, and that's where most of those particular items are being mined right now, is in the sub-Saharan African deserts, right? This is where you see a lot of people who are working for $10 a day, and what they're pulling out of the mine is thousands of dollars worth of items. And this is why at the end of every day, what does the company who runs the mine do? They get rich, and they also x-ray the person at the end of every day so that there is no hidden materials in any orifice of their body. Yeah, let's not think about it. But, I mean, that's literally what they're doing, right? The reason why is because the amount that they're paying them, I mean, even an ounce of gold. I mean, think about an ounce of gold. That's worth $1,400. It's almost back to $1,500. But if you're only paying somebody $10 a day to mine it, Doesn't take much to put an ounce of gold in your tooth, right? I mean, yeah, well, regardless. Okay. So, I try not to think about it too much. But anyways. All right, so. So how do we decide in this country what we should produce? Well, you got to look at what you're producing in these two concepts. You can have a comparative advantage, or you may have an absolute advantage in your production. All right? When you have a comparative advantage when you are producing something, the idea here is that the opportunity cost for producing is lower for your country. So comparative advantages are a one-to-one comparison. So if you have a comparative advantage, if the U.S. has a comparative advantage to, Egypt in producing corn, then the U.S. should focus more on producing corn and trading that corn to Egypt for whatever they have a comparative advantage over us in. Okay? Now, an absolute advantage, basically this just means your country uses the least resources of all countries to produce a particular good. The idea here is that if you are the best producer of a particular good, you have a comparative advantage over every other country in this particular good. Okay? Now, in general, you may think that if I have an absolute advantage in producing a particular good, that this should be the good that I produce, and that's almost it. No. Okay? That's actually false thinking. Right? It's nice if you have a comparative advantage when you produce, but what you should focus on should be based on each individual country you trade with. So if you are going to trade with Japan, and Japan is has an absolute advantage in producing steel, like it does. Steel is one of the best producers of steel right now is Japan. We can produce steel, and we still produce steel for some countries because we have a comparative advantage of it for them, like, say, Mexico. And the reason that our comparative advantage for producing steel is better than Japan's is that what does it take for us to ship our steel from the U.S. to Mexico? Yeah, you put it on a truck or a train and it's there. What does Japan have to do to move its steel from its country to Mexico? It needs a boat. And then it needs a truck and or a train to get it somewhere. So even if Japan has a comparative advantage for us and Mexico in producing steel, Japan actually won't produce steel for Mexico because the comparative advantage that we have over them is higher simply because we're closer. All right? So
get it there faster
and cheaper. Exactly, right? So even though Japan is the best country at producing steel, and yes, they will produce a lot of steel and trade it with China and Taiwan and Thailand and Indonesia and all the other countries in the Southeast Seas, generally they don't trade their steel with very many countries in North America or even really Central America because they're just too far away. And their comparative advantage is not that much better than ours in order to overtake us. All right? So when you go to determine what to produce, don't focus on your absolute advantage. Just decide on each country's basis, right? So if we have a comparative advantage with Mexico in producing steel, we'll produce it. If we have a comparative advantage at producing, teachers for Japan, we will produce teachers for them. All right? And Japan may produce steel for, somebody else, but for us, they may produce cars. Maybe for whatever reason, cars are better produced in Japan than they are here. Is it true? Hard to say. Maybe it's Kobe beef. I don't know. Whatever Japan is better at producing than us, that's what we tend to trade with them, okay? But it's done on an individual basis. So generally, we ignore our absolute advantage and deal with it on a country-to-country basis. So it's best to look at comparative advantages than absolute advantages, all right? So focus with, not a focus, but a focus. Focus on comparative advantages in each country and not absolute advantages. Again, this is another classic trick question. It's, when you're a country determining what to produce, should you focus on your absolute advantages or your comparative advantages? And the fact remains, always focus on whatever you're comparatively better at. All right? Now, So these are reasons why we should trade. Why should we not trade? Why should we say stop countries from allowing us to trade across borders or allowing them to sell their goods in our country?
Because our country likes their stuff better, and it puts us out of work.
Okay, so there's one of them, right? There's the jobs issue. Right, so if we take all of our production, our textile manufacturing, and ship it over to Indonesia or China or New Zealand or wherever we're going to do it, we're going to lose those jobs. Now, when we compare how the goods are made in the other countries versus how the goods are made here. Right, so imagine if we send over all of our shirt producing jobs to, India, where right now, or Sri Lanka or Taiwan, where they're having massive, huge factory burn downs that kill thousands of people. Again, don't think about it. But when we lose those jobs and we ship them overseas, over here in this country, where we are focusing a little bit more on education, and a little bit more on new inventions or new technology to help us build particular products, how many people does it take to, say, produce 100 T-shirts a day? One or two, right? So 1 or 2 jobs to produce 100 T-shirts. How many people does it take to produce 100 T-shirts over in India, where their technology is not so good? Their electricity is very rarely working.
5 or 6.
It's worse than that.
10. 1 to 1.
Takes 40 to 50 people to produce those T-shirts. They actually have to get the cloth themselves. They have to cut it themselves. They have to do a lot of the sewing manually when their electricity is turned off. And the people over there have to be able to not only use regular sewing machines to sew the fabric closed, they also have to be able to stitch if the electricity happens to be off, because there are roving timeouts where electricity is just lost throughout the country of India. This very unnerving part of my trip to India when I was there was that randomly, while you're walking around, all of a sudden, all the electricity could just turn off. Doesn't matter what time of day it is either, too. So you had to walk around with a flashlight on a regular basis, because if you were in a part of town where all the streets were run by the grid, street lights were run by the grid, you were walking in pitch black. And that was a little freaky. Because you're in a foreign country where there's like cows wandering everywhere, because it's India, their cows are revered, so you have to just let them walk around.
Give them a slap on the rump to get them out.
Nope, you can't even touch them yet. So the idea here is that, yeah, we're giving up 1 or 2 of our jobs for people producing shirts, but we're creating 40 or 50 jobs over there. And in addition, what kind of jobs would these be here in the U.S.? 1 or 2 of those jobs. How much are they making?
$9.50 an hour.
Yeah, they're probably making minimum wage. And if they don't have a job, what are we going to do with them? We're going to give them money to do what? To get educated, such that they can get a job that would be better than producing 100 T-shirts a day, right? Hopefully what they'll become is an engineer, and maybe what they can do is travel to India and actually help them produce the 100 T-shirts and get that job themselves, and be the manager of these 40 or 50 people. That's the idea. So is it necessarily a jobs issue? Well, temporarily, yes. Long term, you don't want it anyways, folks. All right? So what else? Why else shouldn't we do it?
It costs money,
Costs money.
like in tariffs and
Shipping. Oh, that's a reasons why. So the reduction in comparative advantage is what shipping does. So from that perspective, Now, you may think, this is one that you guys may not have heard before, but have you ever heard the phrase infant industry? This is not a killing babies example, but the idea behind this is that imagine, if you will, that we in this country decide to start making solar panels. And we have never made solar panels ever in our entire country's history. So we start a company and we name it Solyndra. And we decide to say, okay, we're going to give you a loan, a nice fancy loan that's going to be sort of interest-free for a certain amount of time, so that you can produce solar panels. And the idea here is that we're going to tell all the other countries that are already producing solar panels that you can now not sell your solar panels in our country. Why?
because we want people to buy what we're making.
Yeah, we want them to buy American, and in order to guarantee that they buy American, we have to make their prices of their goods higher than what our new infant industries company is making, right? So restrict companies until, restrict foreign companies until our industry advances. And this is the one slightly decent economic argument that you can make towards restricting trade, right? The jobs issue, that very rarely is a good argument. You can try and use it, but this is a better one, to say that our industry just hasn't figured out how to minimize all of its costs yet, because we're still new. It's an infant. This industry hasn't figured out how to get big enough to take advantage of margins of scale, and so they're stuck, right? They're stuck having to charge a higher price, so we'll put some tariffs on these other companies until we can better compete. The problem with doing this is when you put tariffs on your own goods, what do the other countries do? Oh yeah, oops. So one of the problems that Solyndra had when we invested in them and we tried to protect them with tariffs, is that Solyndra was counting on making some sales outside of the United States. They made almost zero sales outside of the United States because, of course, as soon as we put tariffs on all of the solar panels coming into our country, every country that produced solar panels returned the favor. And unfortunately, that was most of them that use it. And so that's kind of why Solyndra failed, is because we tried to protect it, and instead of Solyndra getting, this little mini advantage, unfortunately that wasn't long enough, or it didn't last long enough for them to actually stay afloat. So then they went under, and then there was a big to-do about how the government doesn't know how to spend its money. All right? Now, what other reasons do we stop trading with countries? Like, say, Cuba. Security, yes, like Cuba, or Libya, or Iraq or Iran. Basically, security reasons. Basically, we're just scared of them for whatever reason, right? So we decide to have, and what do we call a complete lack of trade with a particular country? An embargo, right? So we currently have an embargo with Cuba, where none of our companies in our country are supposed to trade with any other company in Cuba. Of course, don't ask why there are McDonald's in Cuba, because that can't happen, right? Yeah, exactly. Enough said.
Cuban cigars in America. That can't happen either.
Exactly. Because, of course, all the people who smoke Cuban cigars emigrated from Canada first, right? I mean, they didn't break the law. All right, so those are reasons why we might not want to trade. All right. Okay, so one of the terms that I want you to know about is the balance of payments. It's a constant phrase you will hear out there in the economic world, right? Basically, it's in the accounting way of keeping track of our trade with other countries, all right? So when we are trading with other countries, we have to, generally the way it works, just so that you know, folks, is that generally speaking, the United States buys more foreign goods than it sells to foreign countries, right? You guys all know this, right? That we're the biggest consumer of foreign goods in the world, right? Okay. So the idea is that when we buy $500 billion worth of goods from wherever, whatever it is, the idea is that the way we pay them is with $500 billion worth of US dollars. Right? What I mean? Well, you always have to have a new row when you deal with accounting, just so you know. They always balance, right? So the balance of payments, first of all, the balance of payments, it's always... But
it doesn't go straight across?
No, it doesn't go straight across. Accountants never put more than one thing on one line. Oh, how dare you even suggest such a thing? Oh, my God. You almost killed me. Accountants never put anything more than one entry on any one given line. And if you suggest such a thing, she would not put anything out on the same line. Yeah, you could completely make them, kill themselves if you put like two numbers on the same line. It would, whoo. Okay. Anyways, we would have the $500 billion of goods. What would the foreign country have? Cash. They would, and it would be U.S. cash. Okay, so a lot of people who are worried about the fact that we're sending all of our money overseas, they're worried about the fact that we're going to run out of money, right? Or that our money will become worthless, right? Because we keep sending more of it over to them. But the fact remains is that we have the goods. What do they have? They have, so we got a new iPad. Oh, crap, I'm out of money. My wife stole everything. Give me $1. Sweet. All right. So we have 500 billion of these. Well, probably not really. How about like 50 billion of these? They've got 500 billion of these. Who won?
We did.
Yeah, we got the goods. What can they do with this? They could potentially start their fireplace fire if they needed to. But the fact remains is that all they've got is this, and they're not going to build crap with this, all right? But we are going to be able to stay hydrated for the rest of our lives.
But they can buy from other countries.
True, and that's exactly what's going on. But the nice part about it then is that since we're the one who's shipping all the money out there, what piece of money does everybody care the most about? So, yeah, it's kind of bad that we're the ones who buy all the goods from everybody. And it sure looks like we're shipping all of our jobs and all of our money out to the other countries. But what does that make all the rest of those countries do? It keeps them bowing down and worshiping us. Because they need those dollars in order to validate the fact that they're producing goods. Okay? It allows us to continue to make them dependent on us. Okay? So it's potentially bad that, yeah, we're shipping them some of our jobs, but folks, what we're also shipping them is dependence, right? With every dollar that we send them goes a little bit of, because they're just going, oh, we need a little bit more. We need just a little bit more. We need just a little bit more. Essentially, yes. I mean, it's kind of sick and gross in thinking about it, but really, they are dependent upon us for their livelihood to continue. If it didn't, they would have, most of the rest of the world would have to go back to growing rice in their flooded plains, and that's all they would be able to do, right? I mean, the fact that we continue to buy the stuff that they make keeps them dependent on us. All right, so the balance of payments. First, realize that the balance of payments is a ledger book, which means that there are no...
Two numbers on the same row.
Yeah, there's no two numbers on the same row, and anytime you write a number on one row, you write the same number on another row. So the balance is always there. It's always balanced. So from a balance of payments perspective, nobody gives a crap about the fact that we spend more on imports than we do on exports. When people get upset is when they talk about the balance of trade. This is the phrase that everyone cries and screams about, okay? And what economists try and do is they try and tell everybody, look, the balance of payments is still set, right? People are dependent upon our money. They are. The economy, the world economy is run on our money. That means that our money is always going to be worth something which should make you feel safe. And that's nice, right? Unfortunately, the balance of trade is exactly what you think it is. Exports minus imports. So exports being how much American goods do we sell to foreign countries, imports being the number of foreign goods that Americans buy. Right? That's what balance of trade is. Just straight old, this is net exports. If you think back to your formula for GDP, what's your formula for GDP? C plus I plus G plus X minus M, right? Net exports. That's what the balance of trade is. And yes, we are the biggest negative balance of trade country in the entire world, 10 times over. Again, lots of people complain about it, and they say that we should try and balance our trade, that we shouldn't buy as many imports as we do. We should start forcing less trade so that this balance becomes more balanced. And it wouldn't necessarily be a bad idea, but again, that would be like removing the heroin from the addicts, right? I mean, the rest of the world, once they don't need us anymore, they're not going to need us anymore. Good or bad, I don't know, all right? But realize the difference between these two, right? Balance of payments versus balance of trade. And this is often written as the trade deficit. And if you guys are bored some afternoon, you can look up what our balance of trade issue is currently and how big of a negative number we have from this. Again, just remember that with that big, huge negative number, it means that all of our dollars are spread throughout the world and that everybody needs them to continue to be worth whatever they are worth right now. So if we see a big, huge jump in inflation, yes, you guys may get hit a little bit, but the rest of the world gets hit just as hard, because they've got just as much money as we do, or U.S. money as we do. All right, and that's probably a good enough spot to stop. That's not really the end of Chapter 21. It's about 2/3 of the way through it. What I would like to do on Wednesday is, 1, have a quiz on Chapter 20, and then 2, finish up on Chapter 21, where we'll talk about exchange rates and how many U.S. dollars are worth however many euros or yen or pick your favorite currency. We will talk a little bit about how the balance of trade and the balance of payments can lead to changes in the exchange rate. All right? So no homework. We'll get to that later if we want to. We can debate on Wednesday whether we want homework on Chapter 20.